I think we can get started. I will put some slides on the screen and we can start talking through it. Everybody, welcome. This is Powering Morning Brew's Transformation. We'll be talking a bit about how Morning Brew chose a news technology stack to better serve their readers, their content creators, their developers, any challenges they face there, any learnings we can take from it. Happy to sort of share their story and talk through it a little bit. Before that, I'll be talking a little bit through what Sanity is, and Drew will be talking a little bit through what Vercel is. We'll be asking questions together. Yeah, hope you guys enjoy it. So before that, though, I would like to introduce the people that I'm on screen with. I'm Carolina, of course. I'm a solution engineer here at Sanity. I work closely with our enterprise clients on both making sure Sanity is the right tool for them, but also as they kind of grow in the tool, things like content modeling, integrations, plugins, etc. And I will pass it over to Drew Monroe to introduce himself.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Drew. I'm the director of engineering here at Morning Brew. And I'm sure I'll be referred to as Brew Drew today, as I'm joined by another Drew, who I'll pass it along to.
Hey everybody, my name's Drew. Yeah, I'm sure that's not going to get confusing at all during this stream. Yeah, so I'm a solution engineer over here at Vercel. Help companies like Morning Brew go from whatever their current tech setup is to maybe adopting something like Next.js and Vercel to kind of streamline their development process.
Thank you both. Moving on, just a brief intro to what is Sanity. We are the platform for structured content. We're not a headless CMS, though we can do that too. The reason that we're a bit different is because of our sort of three-pillared approach that you see here. Underlying Sanity and the content that you retrieve from it and you write to it is the content lake. It is our content database. It is powered by Grok, with which you can not only query and filter content, but also follow references between content that's joined to each other, do operations like joining strings, even geolocation. So very cool heart of your data there. On top of it is the Sanity Studio, which is an open source React app that you can configure to make sense for your business's needs. So not only are you sort of changing the shape of your content, creating schemas, you're also doing things like pulling in content from other sources if you need to, previewing content within the studio itself, using expressive structures in order to sort of make that happen. And last but not least is the developer experience. Because we are open source and committed to open source as a philosophy and using JavaScript as the basis for a lot of what we do, a lot of people can contribute to Sanity and its ecosystem. That includes things like plugins, but also things like best practices, snippets, guides, etc. So you don't need to sort of build from the ground up every time. You're not alone when you're developing in Sanity. Underlying this philosophy is structured content, which you'll hear a lot, I think, both in this call and in a lot of our messaging. Basically, that means in Sanity, you'll build your content out of what makes sense for your business and then make it composable using primitives like strings and dates, as you see here, but also things like beautiful high-definition images or even content you're getting from other data sources like a product or a pin or even video. And you're pulling that all together, composing and giving your editors the power to make a finished product and then sending it out to anywhere, not just a website, although we will be focusing on websites today. But because of the flexibility of Sanity, you can also push it out to things like PDFs, mobile apps, anywhere where you need to consume content. And now that we've talked about kind of where we are sort of thinking about content, where we came from. So we started in 2017. We have offices in Oslo and San Francisco. And since 2017, we've pushed out 150 million documents to be used by our customers. We're serving 10 billion API requests a month. We have 300,000 projects that are being used by developers. Even in our Slack community, we have about 30,000 people in there. So again, please do check us out and get involved. So now that we've discussed the kind of underlying data layer, the content that's powering Morning Brew's transformation, let's talk about the web app.
Yeah, to dig into the web app, a lot in common actually between Sanity and Next.js and Vercel in general, with our kind of idea of here is a language, JavaScript, that we all know and love, and here is a tool, React, that can get a lot done for you that tons of people know, right? And Next.js is kind of this great framework that gives React even more superpowers out of the box. So here at Vercel, we actively maintain Next.js and really believe in open source as well. So that's the Next.js spiel. Once you've got your app, though, you've got to take it to production, right? You can't just get off of localhost is some of the best advice you will ever get as a developer. So what's that mean? Well, Vercel believes in providing tooling that helps developers go from an idea to a global performant web app as soon as they can, right? We want to enable iteration and really getting as much feedback as you can, kind of being as scientific about the web development process as we can be. And to kind of do that, we just had to build a lot of things that help enable you, right? CI/CD is something that every app needs that no one actually wants to work on, right? You've got this like host of tools here in Vercel's toolkit that helps you go from just simply starting with your next app to having it truly be performant and global, which is easier said than done most of the time, but Vercel actually does make it easy. And while we're focused on Next.js in this conversation today, because that's the framework Morning Brew chose, you can host pretty much any modern JS framework on Vercel. And due to some recent work with the build output API, you can actually take your own homegrown framework and kind of give those outputs to Vercel in a very specific way and take full advantage of Vercel's infrastructure regardless of what your app's built in.
Hi, I'm back. We'd like to talk a little bit about how Sanity and Vercel can work together. So usually in a Vercel kind of next app situation, you're going to be using Sanity as the underlying data layer. You're going to be able to use it to drive the content that is actually going to be showing up for your end users, reshaping it, querying it, regardless of how you're using it. So you can use our API or API CDN to fetch data at build time, if you're serving server side, et cetera. That's where Sanity sort of sits at the kind of back of the stack there.
Yeah, and if you want to see a version of this application, kind of this, what we're showing here, in the next examples folder, there is a really good example and getting started guide of using Sanity. It's probably one of the highest quality examples in the Next.js examples folder. So, but yeah, so we've got an app. It's powered by Sanity. The next thing we need to do is kind of power that backend layer that supports a lot of the dynamic pieces that actually enable your Next.js app. So Vercel gives you this serverless compute that scales up and down seamlessly. You kind of just don't need to worry about it. That's one of the beauties of how we've built things with Vercel. And then after you've got the kind of dynamic pieces figured out, we've got an edge CDN available to make sure that that content is served in a blazing fast way for everyone, regardless of where they're located, right? That's a very important thing for performance. And now that we've kind of covered all of the different technical bits, let's hand it over to Drew at Morning Brew to talk through kind of the use case specifically, like how did we get here?
Yeah, thanks for that handoff, Drew. And I'm glad you can serve it anywhere over here in Montana. You can get some spotty internet service, and it still works for me. So that's good. Everyone, for anyone who's not familiar with Morning Brew, Morning Brew is a media brand, and we empower the modern business leaders with the latest need-to-know content. And if you've been following our journey, you've seen that our brands and our content have grown significantly in this last year alone. Next slide there, Carolina. These are our brands. These are a list of brands that you've come to know, whether you're consuming us via your inbox or on the web. You might be listening to a podcast or two. We've had some events this year, and we'll have more events in 2023. And certainly you may be seeing us more on YouTube or wherever you stream your videos. So we began with a single newsletter back in 2015. And it is what we think today is still the best daily newsletter product. But that's given us a little bit of a license to build out more franchises, build more newsletters, and allow our audiences to engage with our content across a number of different mediums. Within this year alone, we now connect with over 18 million people each month across a number of different platforms. And in this next slide, you'll see those platforms. You'll see these business success metrics. And if you're wondering if Sanity or Vercel can scale with you and with your business needs, hopefully this can answer some of those questions. Under the hood of these business success metrics, Sanity today is managing more than 30,000 documents in our production data set. It's serving about 11 million API requests a month and over 15 terabytes worth of data. On Vercel's end, Vercel is serving about 50 million cache requests a month at this moment for us. And we're running about 2 million serverless function invocations a month. I hope we're not going over our contract, Drew. Don't call me after this. And so if you're visual, if you're in the audience and you're a little bit visual, if you want to put together what Drew and Carolina shared with us last in that really nice animated slide, here it is, right? Here's Sanity on the back end. All of this is deployed to Vercel. Both our Sanity instance and our Morning Brew applications are deployed to Vercel. And then morningbrew.com and all of our content on the web is powered by a Next.js app. And this gives you a nice little visual for how that interaction takes place.
Thank you so much both for that introduction to what you guys are doing. So now we'll start sort of asking each other questions, talking through Morning Brew's transformation. And I can begin. I wanted to take a step back and think about when we first started talking to each other, when Drew from Morning Brew was looking for an optimized stack for content and delivery. I'm curious about the goals you were looking for, in what ways you perhaps felt held back by your previous stack. I'd love to hear about what that process was and how you went through it.
Yeah, that's an awesome question, Carolina. Twofold, right? We're with both Vercel and Sanity. So on Vercel's side, on the deployment side and the delivery side, Morning Brew initially had a monolithic Rails app where we were storing our content and serving our content for our end users at morningbrew.com. It worked for us for a long time, and for a long time, to be fair, we were only serving our newsletter. So as a reader, you would get the newsletter in your inbox, and if you wanted to view that in the browser, there's a link still today where you can click view in the browser and it shows it to you. But we wanted to deliver more of our content, allow the content to stand on its own on the web, allow readers to go from piece to piece. Maybe there's content that doesn't necessarily live in the newsletter, doesn't get sent to your inbox, but we still wanted to, have our readers access that content for the day. And so certainly you can build some caching mechanisms into a monolith like a Django or a Rails, but we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we certainly didn't want to spend our time building that caching mechanism or building that caching layer. And so we knew that going with more of a static site generation tool would be our best use of time and best use of that tool. We chose Next.js over Gatsby at the time, and for us it was a no-brainer to deploy Next.js to Vercel, given the close relationship between Vercel and Next.js. And we make heavy use of ISR for those who are a little bit more technical on the call. So we use incremental static regeneration. We rehydrate our content as it needs to be hydrated. Most recently with Vercel's on-demand ISR that they've released, that's been huge for us to only update content when it needs to be updated, when our editors update that content. So that's great for our end users, fast end user experience, and that really met the business goals.
Yeah, getting close to 100% cache hit ratio sounds wild, but you actually can achieve it with on-demand ISR. So glad y'all are adopting that and using it. It's one of my favorite new pieces of technology we've rolled out.
Well, it's awesome. It's better than our just rehydrate everything 5 minutes or get creative on rehydration. So it's been good for us, Drew.
I remember you spoke with the Vercel team about that approach, about the kind of the date-based revalidate approach, and I think Vercel was quite amazed by it. So I think you did a good thing.
Well, we can share that little snippet, that little ditty for anybody who's interested. No, that's awesome. And then on the other side, on the flip side of that, Carolina, to answer your question, our other goal, and as it relates to Sanity, is we had an internal CMS that was solely focused on building newsletters. And again, that worked for our business needs for a long time. But about 2 years ago, it was Morning Brew's agenda to become more of a media company and not just focus on newsletters. And so when you logged into our CMS, the first thing you saw was, choose your newsletter. And then it was, okay, choose the date, and then choose what stories you want to put in that newsletter and write a story that's specific to that newsletter. It was very rigid in its validations, in its schema, the UI, the database. We were storing HTML in SQL, and that can get a little bit messy, even delivering that HTML to the web versus delivering it to a newsletter. For anybody who's familiar with newsletters, your inbox client, it's like the 90s. And so you're very restricted in the semantics and the HTML that you can use. So we'd have to hide classes or delete classes or CSS structures that we might want to use on the web that don't work for newsletter. And so we needed something that was a little bit more flexible. And finding a headless CMS was kind of our first goal. And Sanity certainly does that. But Sanity, as I think Carolina, you also said in the intro, is so much more than that and can be more than that. And we really started to think about how our data could be reused in different areas, right? In different mediums, whether it's the web, whether it's the newsletter, whether it's a podcast, whether it's YouTube, whether it's commerce, and without our editors or without our end users duplicating content or trying to mess with WYSIWYG editors. The whole, content as data really jived with our team.
That's amazing. Thank you. A couple of things here that are coming to mind. First, I wanted to point out, I forgot to mention at the top, if you'd like to put a question in the chat, please do. We'll see them coming in. We'll answer them at the end, but we'd love to hear what you're thinking or how you're sort of processing what we're saying. And second of all, speaking of questions, I wanted to actually think about something that you mentioned around your content model being brittle, about wanting to iterate, customize, do new things. It's a pretty common refrain. I hear it from a lot of customers at Sanity as well. But Drew from Vercel, I'm curious if there's something in there that you also thought, oh yeah, this person really needs to move over. This is time to kind of move to a new stack. Is there like a point there that you can point to?
Yeah, we hear quite frequently when we're talking to teams, either in marketing or the content side of the house, there's this pain with like, hey, we can't do this unless engineering does the XYZ thing first, right? And we get into these points where you kind of are stuck without engineering's help. You can't really push the business forward. And, that is really common early on in a company's life cycle. But as you kind of mature your tech stack and get a little further in that space, I think people want marketing to just be able to market, right? Like let marketing do what they want to do. And something like Sanity is always an amazing first step at kind of enabling that. Then obviously you've got to do some dev work and probably change some internal process and stuff like that. But the first thing to kind of making that possible is switching to something like Sanity, in my point of view.
I think saving developer hours is huge too. I mean, maybe not a lot of people don't. Morning Brew has an impressively lean team. They've accomplished a lot with the resources they've had. So props to you.
100%. I am so amazed at what y'all ship so quick. The ability to add all of those brands is insane.
Well done.
Yeah, I hope some of them are out in the audience right now, and you know who you are. They're good. They're a good team. Yeah.
Speaking of your team's needs, I'm curious about what you were thinking of when you were re-architecting your content stack. Did you lay out a list of requirements, and how did you factor in needs from different teams versus the needs of your end users, the Morning Brew readers? Yeah,
that's great, and a good segue from what Drew just mentioned about spinning up new products and brands quickly. That was one of the things we heard from the business. A goal of the business was to launch our B2B products on their own domains. I think that was a goal of the business for about 2 years. They saw a need for this from a business perspective, from an advertiser perspective, creating some distinction between our brands. And for us, from a product and engineering perspective, it was always kind of, well, yeah, we could, but I just don't know if our foundation is right yet. We have cracks in our house, if you will. And anything we do probably won't support that. So that was a big one. That was one of the biggest ones is, hey, by using Sanity, by using Vercel, by using some of these state-of-the-art tools, we'll be able to launch these brands and these domains more quickly. From a tech perspective, it was just not having to duplicate content across a number of different services, not having to spin up a monolith here and a monolith there. One's just a CMS, one serves content to the front end. Sanity has helped us just, there's one CMS, there's one content server, it's Sanity. And from an internal user's perspective, right, from editorial and marketing teams, I love what Drew says about letting marketers market. We want to get out of people's way. We don't want to be the blocker. We don't want people, folks saying, engineering's not getting this done fast enough for us. We really want to templatize and give them the tools and the Lego blocks to go and build what they want to build, or deliver what they want to deliver to their end users. And we also don't want to, make them duplicate content or take pieces of their data or content and put it somewhere in one place in Sanity, another place in Sanity, go take that in another CMS or another legacy tool. We really wanted there to be a singular tool that could do it all for our teams, and that's what Sanity and Vercel has helped us do.
And stop me if I'm getting too nitty gritty. Was there, so it's just because something we're doing internally actually is interviewing customers and actually having a process around interviewing. Was that something that you did with people internally? Did you have a form or some way of scientifically addressing people's needs?
Great question, Carolina. Tough question. So I joined at Morning Brew about 1.5 years ago. And I think I came in right at the time when we had already decided that our CMS, our internal CMS, was not going to cut it for us. Both a blessing and a curse. I was pretty much told, I was hired and I was told, find a new CMS for our team. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. But we were also lean. We've tripled. Our team has tripled. Morning Brew has tripled in the last year alone. So I'm sure there was some upfront, hey, what do you all need? What do we expect? To be honest, I wasn't necessarily part of those conversations. But going forward, it's been great. We do have product design. We have a built-out product design team now. We have a researcher on that product design team. And I know on new features, net new features that we've been building recently, we do take a lot of time to research what our internal users need, what our end users need. And just from an internal perspective, we're making heavy use of Sanity's Figma UI components to be able to even map out, hey, this is the user journey internally of how I might go about creating these experiences in Sanity. And I think that's been a fantastic process that we've started to implement.
Wow, I love that. That's honestly, the before story, normally it's just, you normally start with a mock-up that shows the landing page, right, from the end customer's perspective. But I love thinking about the holistic life cycle here. That's impressive.
And I think some Sanity people are going to be really happy that you're using that library too. That's very exciting. Speaking of sort of modeling out workflows, thinking about workflows, I'm curious about how the sort of move to treating content as data changed the way that you the workflows of your development team and the workflows of your editorial team. How do they work now? How did they work before?
Yeah, great question, Carolina. I think one of the biggest changes, and for a media company, if folks are familiar with media in general, we all come from WYSIWYG editors. WYSIWYG editors, rich text editors were the golden standard for at least the last decade, if not longer. And so not thinking in terms of, hey, how can I manipulate this HTML and these semantics, but just thinking about being given an input and saying, this is the title, put your title in, put your body in, and we'll worry about the rest. We'll deliver it to where we need to deliver it to. I think that's certainly a change. That's changed both from a development perspective and us not having to manage and manipulate HTML, which is a fresh breath there, but also from an editorial perspective. Kudos to editors. They become power users in their CMSs, especially across media brands. They don't love, there's a joke, and sure it's in other places, but they love to hate their CMSs, and they find ways to get around your restrictions that the engineers have put in or your validations. And I think by thinking of content as data and again removing the page building or the HTML semantics that those old WYSIWYG editors allowed, we can really just say, you focus on what you do best, which is the content. let us make sure that our brand experience, wherever that is, whether it's on the web, whether it's in the newsletters, whether it's on a social platform, we'll make sure that that experience looks consistent and great with whatever content you give us. So it's been great from a technical perspective. I think it's also allows the entire team to think about how things get built. As I mentioned, we map out a user journey in Sanity in Figma. I think about building CMSs in the past. A lot of times the ERD and the schema is hidden. Only the engineers know about it. Product folks don't even know it. Product managers might not understand it, right? And that's both good and bad, but we're kind of the gatekeepers of how something is structured. Now with Sanity, it's interesting to see a shift where we have product managers and product designers and even editors thinking about, hey, how does this fit into the overall schema? How am I thinking about the users over here and how they're related to authors or how they're related to newsletters? I think it's good to be a little bit more transparent and for people to see maybe how the sausage is being made a little bit behind the scenes.
I remember we were speaking to a member of the editorial team, and I think she called out, why does this block have a different name from this block in this other context? Can we not just reuse the same block? Like the idea of an editor thinking about kind of this reusable, repeatable pattern was so amazing. That was great.
Yes.
Speaking of which, I think you also shared some shots of your studio. Would that be a good spot? Would this be a good spot to kind of talk through what you are working with? Just to give some illustration.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's look at it. So I see this newsletter creation slide here. I think I'm on the right one.
Yeah, that's right.
And I see that you have different slides for newsletter and story creation. So those are different content types. Do you want to talk through some of the choices that you're making here? Anything that might be pointed to the sort of user who's watching on the stream?
Yeah, sure. This is, as Carolina said, newsletter creation. We've got our editor view, and then we have a preview, which is quite common in our studio. Here we're reaching out to an engine and a template, an email template engine that's rendering all this data and spitting it back to the end user. They like to be able to see how how the top blurb here, for example, from Neil and Maddie are rendering, if it's too long, if it's too short. They like to double check that links are rendering correctly. From the editor side, you can see authors there, a list of authors, good use case for references in Sanity for anybody who's familiar with it, right? We have a people document, and we can use those people in different ways, whether it's for a newsletter or for a story, which might bring us to the story. Yeah, story creation. So here's story creation, and newsletters can be composed of these stories, but these stories also live on their own differently than, say, the story I gave about our old CMS. So these stories can be published to the web, and we do give our editors, I think, a nice view of both the web preview over there on the right-hand side. That's, of course, tying into Next.js. And then we also have that social preview. You can see up at the top there, we can show an editor, for example, how this story, based on some of the SEO metadata they've inputted, or OG metadata, how that might render, say, in Twitter or Facebook or wherever they share this article.
Right. Content as data means it can be delivered across these different spaces. Yeah, amazing. Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah, as someone who has done email HTML development, I love that you have a live preview of what's actually going to happen there, because frankly, email breaks all the time, right? You mentioned it like the 90s, and it's maybe even more tables than the 90s actually. So that's awesome. Y'all have that built in there, and then you've got the web preview right there as well. So you've kind of got both in one workflow. And then that kind of, let's jump off to kind of maybe talk about rendering strategy for the web specifically. Browsers are thankfully a little better at rendering than email clients, so maybe a little more straightforward, but there's still performance and things like that you have to kind of care about. So what are kind of some of the strategies you've taken for kind of getting good performance out of your website with Vercel and Next.js?
Yeah, great question, Drew. As mentioned before, we make heavy use of ISR and now on-demand ISR. So for some folks on the call who may be less familiar with that terminology, we're statically building or statically generating the content, those stories on our web. And with on-demand ISR, we're only statically generating it when that story changes. So let's say I go in as an editor today and I publish a news article. It gets delivered to the web. As an end user, I can see that story, and it'll never change. Vercel will continue to serve up that cached version of that story until an editor goes back into Sanity, and maybe they had a typo, maybe they needed to fix a quote, maybe they wanted to add a new image, and when they click publish again in Sanity, then it will go and update and rehydrate that content, but again, continue to be cached until the end.
Yeah, I love that use case because for some reason, anytime I write a blog post, I don't catch any typos until I publish it, right? Like as soon as I publish it, that's when all the typos show up and I'm like, oh my goodness, so many errors here. How could I have done this, right? But this gives you kind of control over that pretty much immediately, right?
Oh yeah.
For folks wondering on the call how quickly on-demand ISR kind of does push globally, behind the scenes, that's guaranteed to happen in 200 milliseconds or less. So that is global as well too. So we're not just going to one region where that specific customer is, that's actually going to all of our 18 different regions by default.
Something we talk about at Sanity is delightful editorial experiences too. And I think the idea of not having to just message or Slack somebody when you've made a mistake, being able to sort of see and fix those things without having to create a bump in anybody's day is pretty delightful, I think. So
yeah, because
ISR works really well for that.
The alternative before that was like, you've got the page out, right? But now you need to go ask some engineer to manually purge the cache for you. And then so yeah, there's that whole workflow of like, well, now I'm a little embarrassed to admit I need this help. Instead, that's all automated and we don't ever have to tell, kind of like when you send a Slack message and realize you need to edit it immediately before anybody else sees. You kind of have that same ability with serving content at scale, which is the cool part.
That's such a good call out, both of you. I can't tell you. I wish I counted the number of Slack messages we have in our Sanity Astra editorial Slack channel of saying, "Hey, I updated this content. It's not changing on the browser," and then us reminding them, "Hey, if it was published within the last 24 hours, it's every 5 minutes. If it's 48 hours, it's an hour." It's been a breath there in the last 2 months to not have to respond to those Slack messages. Yeah.
That is awesome. I'm glad you've had good success there. Honestly, that feature was built entirely with media companies in mind. It's useful for a bunch of other use cases too, but I think it shines with media. Speaking of media and crazy media growth, let's transition to talking about all of those brands you've launched. That was an insane number of brands you've kind of shown on those past slides. I've been extremely impressed with how quickly y'all have been able to do that. I've worked in the past at companies where it's like, oh, we've got brand A, maybe let's spin up brand B and C sites. And those initiatives take sometimes a full year. But y'all are doing this at a very fast cadence. And I'm curious kind of how you're able to do that, frankly.
Yeah, that's a great question, Drew. I'd say a big kudos just alone to our engineering team. I think we've got the best one in the media company these days, if I can say so. But they picked the right tooling here, right? So not only did they help pick Vercel as the right platform to help us with delivering our content, but they decided that earlier this year, and it was actually just Jan 1 of this year, Q1, that we were going to use a mono repo for allowing us to quickly deliver new brands to our business. We went back and forth. We had a lot of conversations whether we were going to go poly repo, mono repo, benefits, pros, cons. I think Vercel, Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe purchasing Turbo Repo or bringing Turbo Repo under your arm.
Yeah. Turbo Repo was closed source. We acquired it and then open sourced it. And the original founder, Jared Palmer, is still working on it, growing an amazing team here at Vercel.
Yep. And I think that news kind of said, oh, perked our ears and said, oh, interesting. Vercel is really investing in this area. Maybe we should really consider monorepo as the right direction forward. So what does that mean? Morningbrew.com and every site, every domain that looks very similar to that, Emerging Tech Brew, ITBrew.com, all of the B2B brands that we've split out, they're all served from the same monorepo. And we've been able to share code across each of those brands, share graph queries across each of those brands. And with our Sanity structure, the way we've set up our Sanity schemas, we've also been able to, oh yeah, great shot there, Carolina. So this is brands, right? It's almost self-serve to spin up a new brand minus some DNS changes that we have to make as engineers. But this very easily shows you the configurability that we've given to our end users to configure what a brand looks like, what the homepage looks like, what colors it's using, and that was a key, a big business objective for us in the first half of 2023. But all things, a big part. I mean, I just don't see how this would have been possible without the foundation that we built in 2022 with both Sanity and Vercel.
Almost self-serve to stand up a new brand is an amazing statement. So kudos to you and your team, because that is very difficult to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Drew.
So many people want this. So sorry for throwing it up without much warning, but I really wanted to show it off. So it looks great.
Again, kudos to our engineering team. I think, sure, could we automate DNS? Absolutely. Could we make the entire brand experience totally self-serve? Absolutely. I think a little bit of friction in there from an engineering team isn't a bad thing for a business for consistency. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think a little bit of friction is good, right? You still want to have those conversations, and turns out you just said automating DNS, and I got really scared because that's where like all of these crazy outages end up happening. So
fair, Drew, fair.
Maybe we'll save that one for a little bit later on. But yeah, the like safety and iteration sounds very like important for your team. Are you able to like collaborate quite easily between, say you've got a new template going out, right? For one of your pages. What's the iteration story look like between kind of whoever's coming up with the content, maybe the designer who's said what the page should look like, and the engineer who's maybe making this new template from scratch?
Yeah, that's a great question, Drew. For the most part, engineering is out of the picture by the time we've given it to the end user to deliver the page. We haven't yet quite had those back and forth. I need this now, or we need to iterate on this immediately. But what I can say, and Caroline, I think I have the gated content piece. We can show that. This might fit into your question, Drew, around, we built this gated content. I think this is interactive storytelling, maybe a different one. Yeah, there we go, Carolina, thank you. So gated content, most marketers know about gated content. Most of you know about gated content. They needed the ability to create these forms very quickly, right? Create a form to collect some information about the end user, and then deliver them whatever the content that is gated on the end of that, whether that's a story, whether it's a PDF, whether it's a video, you name it. And so that iteration process up front from a product and engineering perspective and a stakeholder perspective was, hey, we need this. This is what we need it to look like. We use product design to come up with the visual. And then we also had forms. So we thought about forms in a sense of, we'll give you a small, medium, large, and extra large form. So this isn't just a, hey, make this form whatever you want, throw whatever inputs you want, because obviously there needs to be some kind of contract from a technical perspective of where that form is where that form data is going and what it's doing on the back end. But we said, okay, we'll give you a small, medium, and large, if you will, form sizes, and giving you that template and that framework, those boundaries to work within Sanity. You can go and create the gated content piece. You can add that image, you can add a title, you can add content, pick your size form, and we obviously explain what that means, what input fields that gives you, and then you can launch it. Right. And again, Drew, back to your point, we let marketers market. We let them go out. We don't get in their way. If they want to iterate on this, if they wanted a new form size, say they wanted an XXL or they wanted to add some different inputs, we'll work really closely with them and product managers and product design to figure out what the best way that could fit in there. But yeah, does that answer your question there, Drew?
100%. Let marketers market.
Something that stands out a lot to me in this story is how much trust there is between everyone too. I mean, I feel like this form story is very much a marketer sort of stepping and going, this is just going to work. There's this level of sort of feeling sure and secure in that platform, which I mean, speaks to like how much it has worked in the past, that they don't have a reason to feel that things will be insecure or broken. It's great.
Absolutely.
Speaking of wins like that, I would like to sort of ask my last question, sadly, about as you adopted Sanity Vercel, what were other successes that you've had? What have been the long-term benefits that you've seen? What would you recommend to other companies if they move forward with this path?
Yeah, the best question of this webinar. Vercel, I think, from Vercel's perspective and Next.js perspective, Drew nailed it in the beginning. He was talking about CI/CD pipelines. No one likes to build those. So the ease of deployments, the uptime, the performance, just to be completely frank, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for us on the front end of things. We just know that one, with the static generation, and two, with Vercel hosting our front end, things work. We have uptime. It's always up. It hasn't gone down, and so that's a far cry from other services that we've certainly had in the past. And then from Sanity's perspective, it's really been the acceleration of and the velocity that we've had out in building new functionality. To think that it took us as long as it did to make newsletters and stories working in our internal CMS, and then to see where we are just a year later. We just celebrated our year of being in Sanity last week, actually. And so for that to be only a year, and for us to already be creating, we've done the newsletter, we've done the stories. That's kind of old news from our technical perspective and a product perspective. But to be able to empower our marketing teams with gated content pieces, to empower our growth and marketing teams with managing and manipulating the home pages, the nav bar you see, the featured stories, the spotlights, to allow more people to self-serve has been huge. It just would not have been possible without Sanity. And then I think Caroline or Drew, both of you said this in the beginning, but you mentioned how developers, working in JavaScript, they're familiar with it. They're able to manage Vercel and whatever Vercel throws at us. Same thing about Sanity, right? With Sanity being written in JavaScript, being able to use React, the same engineers that we've hired who can manage and maintain and build incredible experiences on the front end, they're also the ones managing and maintaining and building the experiences within the CMS. So you don't have that traditional back-end team is focusing on the CMS, front-end team focusing on the front end, and then someone not wanting to talk to somebody else about that contract that they agreed on, or someone getting upset because the graph or the API doesn't match what they thought it would match. They only have themselves to blame. So it's a single engineer or two engineers who are working on the entire product, and that's really great from my position, from even a leadership position, being able to hire engineers who can do it all with Sanity, Vercel, and all of your experiences for your end users is really great.
Even for developer happiness, right? If a developer wants to jump from one project to another, or think about how things are composed, it's all so transparent and interconnected that it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm thinking of my old coworker who was just the one person who knew how our CMS worked, who always had to go do random CMS migration things. And it's like, I know he didn't enjoy that work. But he loved writing React. Just stay in the your we can call it the zone, but it's really just flow, right? You can stay in the flow of writing React and then working on Sanity, and then still writing React in your next app, and then your feature's live before you know it.
So I think we'd like to address some of our audience questions. We have a list of them here. I think if it's okay, I'll ask the first one, and then maybe someone wants to pick one out and sort of say, I really want to answer this one. Unfortunately, we have 13 minutes left, but I can ask the first one that I received question from Morning Brew Drew. Does Sanity serve content for your email newsletters, or are they copy and pasted into something like SendGrid?
Great question. So our email newsletters right now are composed and built in Sanity, and then when the editors, when we deliver those or send those to our end users, that goes through an ESP. Right now it's partly automated and partly manual. We're looking to make that more automated for our end users in the future. But we create campaigns. It's like a MailChimp or a SendGrid. We create the campaign for the end user when they click publish button in Sanity. Of course, that's custom to us. We'll send along the content. We'll send along the template. We'll send along the user list. Everything we send along to our ESP, and then any final touches that before the send goes out in the morning or in the afternoon is made by our editorial team. So half and half.
There's a Lambda somewhere that reshapes that sort of Sanity JSON content into MJML or whatever it needs to be to make that happen.
Something like that. Yeah, exactly, Carolina.
Got it. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like that feels burning to address? Otherwise, I can choose the next one.
Let's see. I'm looking through the list here quickly. I think so. There's some pretty interesting ones in the chat. I think a lot of people have questions for Brew Drew.
Yeah, they're all for you. So this is really
oh boy,
a feast for you. We can go chronologically. I think that's okay. How much of Brew's structure, routing, and connectivity is based on connections within Sanity Studio versus connecting them using the front end? Are you doing configuration of a front end, I guess, through Sanity, or is there logic on the front end that's sort of taking care of some of these choices? Would be how I interpret this.
So our front end today, we're using Graph on the front end, and we've federated that data. So we have a bunch of different services on our back end. We still have some legacy places where some content is served up from that's not Sanity, and we federate all of that data actually through an open source tool called GraphQL Mesh. It's both loved and hated by our engineers internally. I am a little bit to blame for its existence in our stack. It's both an API gateway and a mesh, which can get a little tough to deal with. But we extend, this is really neat because we're also able to extend Sanity's graph where it maybe doesn't fit our needs from a presentation layer. It extends, we're able to create our own resolvers. So we can write a Grok query, resolve that, and make sure that the front end is only talking in a single graph, reaching out to our back end. And the front end doesn't really care where that, at the end of the day, how we see it, the front end shouldn't really care about where that content is coming from. We should be able to spin up X number of services on the back end, X number of Sanity instances on the back end. And as long as it's all federated into a single graph, our front end can request what it needs and display it as such. Does that answer that question, Carolina?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe sometimes you see modeled in Sanity things like route, slugs, et cetera, redirects, that sort of thing. And so, which is hard to kind of unite with this idea of a graph mesh that's like really just content data based. So
yeah, I can say like we do have some redirects from some old, for example, from legacy content. Those are actually hard coded in our Next.js app. But the slugs, we do give some configuration to slugs in our Sanity instance. But again, with Next.js and the paths, I'm no Next.js expert, but with the path and the routing that Next.js presents you out of the box, we do have to fit some of that, the content, a story falls under, story asterisk or story star, and anything that's a story related, of course, gets rendered on the index page of, app/stories.
Yeah, and I think Sanity leans itself very nicely just by default to there's kind of this trend of like server-driven UI, right? And Sanity, like by default, is that when you build your Next.js app, unless you're like literally putting like JSX inside of Sanity, which you might.
I've seen weirder things.
So some people might be doing it, but the default way you would use Sanity very much is this like server-driven UI approach. it's just instead of like hard coding some JSON blob yourself with all of that mapping and responding from an API endpoint, you're using Sanity to power it all. So I think maybe that's kind of the question, or maybe that was, anyway, we can, if in the chat, if that didn't answer your question, let us know and we'll maybe provide some more clarity.
For sure. But for now, I think we'd like to change tack a little bit and talk a bit about caching. There's a question here. How do you ensure that all pages using cached content are purged or updated when you update the content in Sanity? Let's say you update the title on 1 of 10 articles you display on the front page of Morning Brew. So how does that one time change everything?
Okay, I'm going to give you a little insight into how that works. But from a homepage perspective, we are not yet on on-demand ISR. So our homepage is actually still on just ISR, old school. I think we do every 5 minutes, rehydrate, or every 10 minutes. So we're not quite modernized there yet. But from a story perspective, right, and you can see how that's a little bit slightly easier. But if a story changes, everything on that story page gets purged and rehydrated. That'll be an interesting problem for us to solve. We do want to solve it. We're making a lot of API requests, probably unnecessarily so, to Sanity because of this just blanket 5-minute rehydration. So yeah, if you're an engineer who knows something or two about that, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, it sounds like we just found a good applicant for you.
There we go.
Yeah. And to be clear, I think it's perfectly, like, it's a great approach to combine standard time-based ISR with kind of the event-driven ISR as well. I think they pair together really nicely for some of these different use cases. Yeah. And to speak to how this could work, I think you could probably just query Sanity for what's connected and then kind of get that data set back, and in Next.js call res.revalidate after version 12.1, by the way. So here's your motivation to upgrade to the latest version of Next if you haven't yet.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's common across all data platforms, right? Anytime you're sort of collating data from across your sort of content source, you're going to have to sort of run into this. So amazing. We have time for one last question. I'm going to ask one just because it's sort of more about the structuring of content and how sort of speaking to our philosophy here. So for you, Drew, do you give an example of content you have within Sanity that's repurposed through different front ends? So are you reusing content across different places through different front ends?
Yes. So just as an example, and this is more newsletter and web example, which is strong for us, but we have content that we reuse. So stories. I'll just start with stories. Stories, you're referencing a story. So when you compose a newsletter, you're referencing a story. You never have to override that. You never have to do anything else. You create a story, it goes to the web. All I do in a newsletter is I say, hey, I want this story to go in this newsletter in the daily tomorrow, and all the content is rendered. Nothing else the editor has to do, right? That's an easy one. But I think what's also neat about that is we also give the editors the ability to override, and this doesn't necessarily hit that question, but they can also override that content. So content can go specifically only to a newsletter without impacting the web newsletter, which is also, I think, quite powerful for us. We're limited in size and scope of what we're allowed to deliver to your inbox before we get clipped or before the newsletter doesn't work. And so having shorter content, a blurb or a summary of long form content is something that we also allow our editors to do. Our social team right now uses our feeds. So our RSS feed, they use, so all of our content builds our RSS feed. And then our social platform, our social teams uses our RSS feed to launch or blast those out. If you've ever seen an article on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook coming from Morning Brew. So that's also interesting. Yeah, hopefully that answered that question, Carolina.
Definitely. I think you also come to a good point about sort of building these editorial experiences where referencing is great, having things just happen is great, but then having this additional layer of configurability, of being able to override things, et cetera, is just that much more powerful for editors.
Yes.
Sadly, we're at the end of our hour. This flew by. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if any of the Drews want to give a goodbye as well. We have tons of questions left. So I'll let you guys say bye and then sort of tell you where to go if you'd like to continue the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for chatting with us, Drew. Love this conversation. Very excited to see what your team continues to do with all of this new tech. And here's my final plug, which is if you're interested in hearing about new tech, Next.js Conf is coming up. So nextjs.org/conf.
Yeah, that's awesome, Drew. Definitely get to the Next.js Conf. I'll be planning on attending. Thank you, Carolina and Drew. You two are both fantastic folks. Love working with either of you on either side of this. If you want to continue this conversation in the audience, I am in the Slack community channel. You can feel free to @me or whatever is appropriate there. And then you can also email me if you really want. If you've got a pressing email question, it's just drew@morningbrew.com. I'll try to answer if you email me. But thank you so much, Carolina and Drew.
That's so generous of you. Thank you. And yes, if you'd like to join our Slack and you're not in there yet, that's slack.sanity.io. So see you there. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Everybody.